So Ray, I want to thank you very much for taking the time today to be here and talk with me about the history of HBES and your involvement in the early days of the organization.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate.
Great. And I wanted to start off with a very easy question, a very simple sort of question. I wanted to ask you in what discipline you earned your doctorate and when you started thinking about human behavior from an evolutionary perspective.
I earned my doctorate in anthropology at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I think I began thinking about the biological foundations of behavior after reading Noam Chomsky and his ideas about a language acquisition device and a universal grammar. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of stalled there, and then I tried to take a reading course from one of the professors at Santa Barbara. A little did I know I should have taken the course from Don Simons, who was there at the time. But I was a cultural anthropologist, and what did I know? And in any event, he had me read Eibelsfeld, Love and Hate, and then some other book. And in about 2 weeks, I had read everything he asked me to read, and he said he was out of ideas. And so I just stopped the reading course.
Wow.
So I kind of exhausted him. And but in any event, I probably really got into it when I was incorporated in Napoleon Chagnon's research project among the Yanomamö, and he was looking at me as a cultural ecologist, economic anthropologist, highly empirical, was going to do input-output analyses and study hunting and gathering and horticulture, and then also collect this strange genealogical demographic data that he had envisioned, and we were going to look at relatedness, and I thought relatedness was really cool. Mm-hmm. Kind of a good quantitative way of looking at kinship and kinship ties, but I really didn't fully understand the kind of evolutionary background to it. You know, I was just kind of hardcore quantitative economic ecological anthropologist. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't until after I got back from the field, mm-hmm. Don Simon was writing The Evolution of Human Sexuality, mm-hmm. knew that I knew Chagnon, and so I began reading draft after draft of Don's book, and then he introduced me to George C. Williams, so I kind of got an overall picture through Don's tutelage about adaptation and natural selection and how these measures all made sense in a kind of functional evolutionary perspective.
Okay, that sounds like the ideal introduction to the field to me.
Well, no, what I had was, on one hand, a kind of behavioral ecologist in Chagnon, uh-huh. and I had an arch evolutionary psychologist in Don Simons to kind of like educate me.
I think that's an excellent kind of education to have. Were the first days when you were starting to do research yourself, taking this kind of perspective, did you find that an intellectually lonely time, or did you find that you had a lot of supporters, people to talk about it with?
Doing the field work, was a lot of hard quantitative research, a lot of observation, and I felt very gratified in doing that. And then I had lots of questions I wanted to answer in the area of economic anthropology, human ecology, cultural ecology that was known back in those days. And it was just kind of slowly, I got into a better understanding of how all these measures fit together in some kind of theoretical framework. And so I wasn't too lonely because, I had Chagnon, and then I was a little bit ahead of people like Mark Flynn, Paul Kirk, mm-hmm. Laura Betzig. I was kind of like the guy that came back from the field, working with the Yanomamö, and they were just entering the program at Penn State. They then went over to Northwestern. So mm-hmm. I felt pretty well surrounded by supportive mm-hmm. people in that kind of small sphere. But that was the only sphere that I knew.
Right. So who would you consider to have been your key supporters, the people that were most important to encouraging you?
Well, definitely Napoleon Chagnon, was a key supporter. And Don was very encouraging at the same time. But we, kind of bumped heads a lot because, he was interested in, psychology and mental constructs, and I hated that stuff because it was so, what psychology had been doing for a long, long time and gotten nowhere. But I did appreciate his point of view. And, I did like to count babies and to what people did in terms of maximizing their fitness instead of how well it was designed to do, various things.
Right.
So, those two again were really formative for me. And then, later on, I began to kind of go to the precursors to the HBES meetings.
Yes.
And I think the first one I went to was about 1981 or 82 at Northwestern. And they had gotten some real money. No longer were people staying in each other's houses. We had a nice venue. We had good food. We were put up in a hotel.
Very nice.
And it was great. Excuse me. And the first night I was there, my roommate, and I don't know how this happened, was going to be Sewell Wright. And I was like, whoa. Why me, and so I had a conversation with George C. Williams, and he offered to switch rooms with me so he could, I didn't quite, this may sound odd, but I was a young man, and here's this 90-year-old god, who was sharp as a tack, but, I just felt really, kind of out of place, uncomfortable being his roommate.
Sure.
So George came to the rescue.
That's great. When you were first starting your work, pursuing your evolutionarily informed work on human behavior, did you face a lot of obstacles? A lot of people talk about, well, like Lita and John, for example, talked about their obstacle of trying to get a job with that. But did you find it challenging?
Not too much. I mean, I had some interviews, and I had an interview at Williams College. And there was this committee on appointments and tenure, this kind of super university committee that had to review all kind of hires. And I got into an argument with an art historian about human beauty and the evolutionary foundations of human beauty. And I can blame this all on Don Simons, by the way.
Of course.
And that really just blew it for me. The faculty voted to hire me, but that committee decided that, since I decided to disagree with this guy and saying that, yes, there are universal standards of human beauty and, the pan-cultural, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of my first shock. But actually, when I got to Nebraska, they hired me because I had an evolutionary point of view. And they were really eager to, have me join the department.
Right, so they were sort of before their time in a sense of embracing it in a lot of ways.
Well, there was a primatologist who was kind of a human ethologist.
Okay.
He was interested, and then there was an archaeologist interested in evolutionary theory. Let me say something too about that meeting I went to at Northwestern. What I did, I found out that the people I was kind of following were doing optimal foraging theory. And so Stevens and others who kind of formed the mathematical basis for that theory were really important, and I got to know them. But I persuaded Knapp to invite Eric Smith and Kristen Hawkes. And so we had this kind of strongly behavioral ecological wing coming in with the kind of standard sociobiologists interested in kinship, and then Martin Daly and others, and along with Don Simons, interested in the psychological foundations. And so I'm kind of happy that that NAP agreed to pay their way, and they contributed very nicely to that meeting we had.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. If you were asked what one of your contributions that you think has had the biggest impact on the field, which one would you say it would be?
Oh goodness, I really don't know. What's had the biggest impact on the field. One paper I wrote had to do with the allocation of parental care among the and that was one of the early papers that showed that it's just not mom, but it's aunts, it's older siblings, and hardly ever dad. That engage in direct care.
Yes.
Of kids, and it was kind of put out there, and it kind of showed this kind of strong kinship correlation.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't make much of it other than if you looked at direct care, only 50% of the direct care to a child 2 years and younger was allocated by moms.
Mm-hmm.
The rest was allocated by all these other close kin with dads way out there.
Right, in left field.
Well, they do indirect care. That is, They bring food.
Right.
So that was been cited a lot as one of the kind of early. So I'm pretty happy with that paper. And then also another paper I did on the guard labor exchange among the Ye'kwana,
Mm-hmm.
and how that mapped onto kinship, and it became a kind of complex issue in economic anthropology too, because not too much had been done in that area in terms of actually measuring how much time other households put into other gardens, not their own.
Right. If you sort of on the flip side of that had to give us one of your papers or contributions that you think didn't get the attention it deserved, that you thought would have a bigger impact than it did, do you have one?
I think the recent paper I did on polyandry with my student Katie Starkweather came out last year, but it seemed to not have much of an impact at all. And there we're able to show that polyandry isn't as rare as people think it is, and that we found 53 cases outside of the classical area. For example, the Yanomamö do polyandry. So it's a lot more common than people give it credit for. And that has a lot to do with George Murdoch and his standard, classification of polygyny and monogamy.
Right.
And if you look at how it's defined as, the most prestigious form of marital union. And so, well, that's fine, but there's diversity in marital unions in any kind of society, and so it's a kind of deceptive measure that's cited in all the textbooks. So that one maybe in a couple of years it'll have an impact.
Yeah, it may be just that it needs time to filter through, and I think that is a big thing, is that everybody sort of learns through their textbooks that this is a very unimportant, sort of small, rare, only under the most unusual of circumstances sort of thing. And so they're like, oh, that can't possibly be the way it is. And it's like it's going to take more people pointing it out for people to actually think, oh, maybe we should actually look at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any paper or book that you've worked on that you'd rewrite, if you could, that you do differently?
Well, how about just expunge from existence?
Okay.
I wrote a paper for the Shagnon and Irons 1979 book. I think it was called the Interaction and Relatedness Among the Ye'kwana. And, it's a kind of so what paper, not really well analyzed, not very statistically savvy, and if I had to do it all over again, I would just kind of like tear it up and redo it completely. And I wish people wouldn't cite it. It's been cited much too often.
So that's the message you want them to take away from this. Do not cite this paper. Cite my other much better works.
Now the scatter plots in an evolutionary psychology textbook. you know.
Oh,
And so,
okay, yeah.
you know, please, Robin Dunbar, take it away.
What advice would you have for students who are entering the field today? If you were thinking about trying to tell them what, you know, based on your experience, what would you recommend?
Well, you know, I think the recommendations would be fairly general. Learn a lot about research design. Learn about a lot more about the new kind of statistical techniques that are being used. But you know, and as an anthropologist, you know, I want people to get outside of the lab and stop studying weird people, and also, you know, get into the field.
Sure.
And do you know, better kind of behavioral observations. We've got a lot of stuff on, you know, demography and genealogy and fitness, but we're not that good at looking at exactly what people do to make a difference. We see these associations. If you have a grandmother, then, you know, the survivorship of your children is higher. But, you know, the question is, what's grandma doing?
Sure.
You know, that's what so you want to know the kind of mechanism. And so I think we need more kind of behaviorally oriented kinds of research in, you know, a real kind of ethnographic setting outside of, you know, the United States, just to get a better appreciation of the kind of cultural diversity that we do have. That's as an evolutionary foundation.
Right. I was kind of thinking when you were talking about it, I was thinking about like the studies. So, you know, when I was a student, I did biology first, and you know, I was thinking about going out into the field and studying birds and watching exactly, you know, which chick they were feeding and counting on how much, you know, fish they were, you know, bringing up to give to each offspring. And I mean, it's really like in some ways you want that detail for the human studies.
Well, the problem with birds is that you have no choice because you can't interview them.
Right, you can't talk to them.
And people take shortcuts because we can talk instead of, and we know that as anthropologists or ethnographers that what people say they do and what they actually do oftentimes don't match up. But there are ways of, you know, asking good questions that would kind of, you know, because behavioral stuff, as you know, it takes a long time.
Yeah.
It's really time consuming. And so if we get more clever on our methods to kind of maybe use interviewing techniques in a very kind of rigorous way to get these pieces of information about what people actually do, then we can be much more efficient.
Great. I want to talk to you a little bit about the early days of HBAS itself and the role that you see yourself as having played in those days and in the association, and maybe a little bit more about some of those early meetings.
Well, you know, I went to that one early meeting, and I don't think it was until about the third or fourth official meeting in Northwestern, and then at Michigan, maybe, you know, HBS 4 and 5 or something of that nature. I didn't have a lot of participation because I was in the field. And so there was this problem of, you know, wanting to go there and feeling like it's the organization that best represents my intellectual soul by a long shot. I become very alienated at the American Anthropological Association. In fact, I've been to far more HBES meetings than I have been to American Anthropological Association meetings. And so my participation was you know, intermittent. The people who built it up were, you know, Bill Irons, Dick Alexander, Randy Nessie, and Martin and Margot, you know, really kind of foundational and kind of have set up what we have today. And my role, you know, first, you know, holding a HBS meeting in 2005 in Nebraska, and then in 2007 becoming the treasurer until now, has been just kind of a continuation and a bit of a refinement on what they, you know, the kind of bedrock that they established. And so I'm kind of a late pioneer, if you will.
That's a good way of putting it. I like that. Is there anything that surprised you about the evolution of HBAS over the last 25 years?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I hope that we'd grow faster. And we are growing, but, we're kind of splintering, too, which is okay because we've got the European, a group, and they're doing just fine. And so that's great, and it's a lot of overlap in membership and things of that nature. And then also the Evolutionary Anthropology Society of the American Anthropological Association, and, one of the founders of HBAS, Bill Irons, was one of the early presidents, maybe the first. I'm now the current president-elect, and so we're kind of wheedling our way back into anthropology, and we've got about 400 members, so that's good. So I think we're kind of beginning to become, we're infiltrating a little bit better. We're spreading, and it's kind of heartening to me that the American Anthropological Association might be a place where we could thrive. Because the problem we have is that if you're getting a degree in anthropology, you want to get a job, you pretty much have to belong to the American Anthropological Association because that's where the job interviews. And that's the thing that kind of like put me back into it, along with people like Bill Irons, Jane Lancaster, also really fundamental in the Evolutionary Anthropology Society. And so I kind of like, again, a latecomer, assuming a leadership role.
In what directions would you hope that HBAS and its researchers go in the future? Are there things that you think we haven't focused as much attention on as we should have?
It would be nice to get more neuroscientists, into the fray, so to speak. Maybe have, this may sound silly, but have some of the evolutionary psychologists move off of sex to other sorts of topics, like kinship and friendship and
Sure.
Family life and things of that nature.
Sure.
And so, just become broader and broader and kind of begin to deal with questions that have been traditionally outside of our focus and kind of broaden our reach as a discipline.
Sure. And I think that certainly has been, I think, a common concern in the past has been how much sex and violence is the focus of things, because, they're interesting topics and easy to get people excited about, or students excited about, because they're already interested in them anyways.
Yeah, right.
But I do think that, maybe part of it is as the field matures, more people in the field are also interested in the consequences of kinship and parenting, because these things become more important than just the mating stuff for them too.
Post-mating sort of
yes.
consequences of mating. I think so. But there are lots of interesting historical reasons for it. It has to do with we'll blame it on Don Simons. He wrote a great book, The Evolution of Human Sexuality, and using Trivers to kind of understand male and female strategies, and it's been a powerful and substantial contribution to our understanding of human behavior. And I don't, what can you say? I mean, it's been very productive. I don't think there's been enough study of violence, actually. Although, because, the use of coercion in everyday life, even though it may not be violent coercion, I think is really, really important and hasn't really received as much. I mean, it's received at the level of, let's say, warfare and maybe spousal abuse or something of that nature.
Right.
But, in terms of everyday life, people who have, this is kind of like, a Marxian sort of perspective. But, he has some real insights in terms of the use of coercion. So just not bloody violence, but coercion.
Right. Yeah, I think that the indirect aggression and some of those aspects of things, I think they're harder to study. And so, people have taken advantage of some of the easier topics first.
Right.
That's part of it.
Right. But, one kind of coercion is just withholding resources,
Sure.
And that's really powerful.
Right. One of the reasons that Barry Cool and I were interested in doing this interview series was that when we went to the HBS meeting that was in Albuquerque, we were sitting around having a drink and talking about some of the people in the field that we'd found really pivotal for us, and how it was unfortunate that some of the students that are coming into the field today are never going to get the chance. They'll read their works, but they won't necessarily get to hear people like Margot Wilson and George Williams, David Rowe, Dev Singh, Linda Mealy, people like this talk at a conference again. And I was wondering whether you had any stories or thoughts about some of those people that you'd like to share with the younger generation of researchers.
I knew Margot really well, and Margot was just an incredible, charming person. And every time I see Martin, I see Margot. I look for Margot. Where is she?
Right.
I want to hear that kind of high-pitched, squeaky voice that she has, and the kind of excitement she had for everything, and how hard she worked. And she was just a pleasure to be around. She was really supportive of me. I think Martin divulged that, in fact, she was the one who engineered me being treasurer.
Yes, I heard about that story.
But in any event, that's someone that, I miss very, very, very dearly.
Yeah, I do. I mean, obviously, I do too, having grown up in their lab. And I think, it's unfortunate. It's one of the sort of sad things, I suppose, about the aging process is that, we lose some people along the way. I think it's tough.
And what we can do to kind of give people a taste is, invite Don Simons for a plenary, just for him to give some kind of overview. Because, think back the impact his book had and
yes.
what it set up. And so we could have, a review, having the people come in, and just kind of give a thoughtful plenary about, because they have that kind of perspective,
Sure.
about where we started and where we are now, and they're people that the younger generation would just love to see. So I think, that might be a good thing to do. Randy Nessy, yes. Although I think he was at a plenary a couple of years.
In Montpellier, I think. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, yeah. but maybe once a year. Every plenary should have a spot for some, old hand.
For one of the founder sort of line of people. I agree. I think that'd be fabulous. I think to get Don, we might have to have it in Santa Barbara again. But that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyways, thank you, Ray, for spending the time talking to me today. I'm sure that people that watch this are really going to appreciate that you took the time to talk to us.
Well, and thank you for all the work that you're both doing in getting this down, because it's part of our history, and I'm glad that our organization could help provide some of the funding for this project that you're on.
Thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye.